to be a big deal. And anytime there's a big deal, I want to talk to OUI staff writer Colin Kennedy. Colin, do you think this weekend is a big deal? Because I think it's a big deal.
I would concur with that theory. We got a lot going on across the country. Here we are to talk about it. I have no idea what direction this conversation is going to take. I know it's going to be a lot because, as you mentioned, it's a big deal weekend.
So let's start with what I think are the marquee games on the schedule, right? And that sort of includes OU Texas, but not really when we're talking about teams that are actually vying for college football playoff spots. I mean, Texas still, I think, has an outside shot here. Oklahoma, I think, is dead in the water. But Tennessee versus Georgia is very interesting to me because Tennessee can run the damn football. Like, they're really good at it. And I feel like if they traded quarterbacks with Florida, they might be a national championship football team. Also add to that, you got Chaney as the offensive coordinator for Tennessee, who was formerly offensive coordinator at Georgia. You got Kirby Smart versus Jeremy Pruitt. And you have perhaps the best Tennessee football team that we have seen in some time. And they feel like they understand who they are. They're going to try to run straight at this defense and play ball control football, which is, what Georgia likes to do. So how do you feel this one going out?
This is going to be a fascinating game, man. I mean, obviously, this, for me, is the biggest game of the year for Tennessee because this is kind of the moment that they can validate themselves as a legitimate contender in the SEC. I feel like Tennessee, you mentioned it, they can run the ball real well. I love their stable of running back. They also have really put the pieces together on the offensive line, and that's the key here. I don't think Tennessee has necessarily been that strong in the line of scrimmage offensively over the past few seasons, but now I think with a good quarterback, not great, but now that he has some running backs and offensive linemen to ease the pressure, I think the Volunteers are going into this game fairly confident. That being said, I mean, Georgia at home, I think the Bulldogs are still trying to figure things out. And while they may be a little bit more susceptible to a loss here than maybe in years past, I still give Georgia the edge in this game. Obviously, we're trying to figure out the saga of the JT Daniels transfer, but at the same time, I mean, Georgia still has a very, very good defense. They still have a very good core of running backs, and I think they're still trying to figure out their offensive identity. And if this is the game that it hits, Tennessee's going to be in real trouble. It's just really comes down to what can Georgia get out of its quarterback play. If it's enough, then I have the Bulldogs winning fairly easy. It could be a wake-up call for Tennessee at the same time that it could be a truly validating point in the season for the Volunteers.
So there are 5 tailbacks in this game that are averaging better than 5 yards per carry through the first 2 games. But I think for real. To add to that, Tyrus Jackson has kind of shown up to be a dominant force for Georgia as a wide receiver in a space where I thought George Pickens would have to assume that responsibility like he did last year. It's nice to see somebody is stepping up to try to replace that production that Dominique Blaylock was able to give them last year. But I'm really interested to see who's able to throw the ball around. That's why I pointed to Tyrus Jackson, because if Stetson Bennett is the starter, and I have no reason to believe that he won't be, you're going to look to him on third down situations and say, if we could stop that guy, we can load the box. We're fine with that because that's Georgia. That's who we are, right? Meanwhile, I think Tennessee is just going to have to run the football. And I think if you're forcing Jarrett Guarantano to actually pick you apart in the passing game, you're going to win that. And that's I don't know how you overcome that, man. I really don't. I look at him and I say, man, Harrison Bailey's going to replace you sooner rather than later, and this is a bad game for you to lose because last year I felt like they had Alabama on the ropes, and your man sticks the ball out over the goal line, pulls a Keontae Ingram, and that's the game, right? That turned the game. That's also where Mr. Dennis Smock himself, Jeremy Pruitt, just takes his fingers, sticks it into the face mask of Jarrett Guarantano and starts leading him around talking about how bad he is at his job. I would ask this, though. If you told me that this is going to come down to Ty Chandler and Eric Gray or James Cook and Zamir White, who are you going to pick?
I would roll with Eric Gray and Ty Chandler at this point. I like what they can provide. I mean, Gray had 100-plus yards last week against Missouri, and I love the just veteranship that they have in the running back room. I think Georgia's running back core, like I mentioned, it's still young but very talented. But those guys, I mean, those running backs for Tennessee have been there and done that. And I think they can be very complementary in strength. That's what makes them even more effective. The fact that one can be inserted in a specific situation and excel, and then the other can come in a very different situation, and Tennessee doesn't take a step back offensively. Now, granted, again, I want to point out that the Volunteers have done a great job of assembling an offensive line that allows for these running backs to do that. But for me, I would take Tennessee's running backs over Georgia's right now. Maybe in the future, you ask me this question, I give you a different answer, but I'm rolling with Gray and Chandler in this game if it comes down to it.
I think a place where we might see some separation is at defensive back and who's going to make tackles, right? Because Richard LeCounte already has 2 picks in 2 games. That's on pace for having 10 interceptions in 1 season of football. And there, as you very well know, are guys that don't get to 10 interceptions in 8 years of football, let alone in 1 year of football. And then there's Henry To'o. Do I say that correctly? You know me.
Yeah, I think you got it.
Okay. All right. 12 tackles in 2 games, and I'm expecting to see him fly around and try to stop these guys if at all possible. Who do you think that this comes down to in the end? Because I could see this being like one of those vaunted SEC 7-6 games just as easily as I could see it going 28-24. What do you think is going to actually force someone else to make a chess move here where you wouldn't expect them to, like perhaps throwing JT Daniels or Harrison Bailey into the game?
Yeah, that's my thing, man. It just really, for me, comes down to the quarterback play. It really comes down to it in basically every SEC game that you look at the offense and say, that's not so great. But, I mean, for these 2 teams specifically, you could say they've had some of the more tumultuous quarterback processes in the SEC over the past seasons. And when it comes down to it, I mean, Stetson Bennett and Jarrett Guarantano, they're both guys that still, to this point, aren't really that proven. Obviously, one has had a little bit more game experience than the other, but at the same time, I think their reputations are kind of on a similar level. For me, if Jarrett can really come out and utilize this stage as sort of an elevation process for his career, that's what's going to help Tennessee get the win. He has all the tools. They have a kind of talent around him, but it just comes down to how he can excel singularly. And then for Stetson Bennett, I mean, if JT Daniels is ready to go, I have to believe that the leash is going to be a little bit short here, because the Auburn win 27-6 was kind of surprising for me. Now, granted, Auburn hasn't necessarily run the football that well this season, which really hinders that offense. But, I mean, Stetson was somewhat efficient in that game, but I feel like he left a little bit there on the table. If JT Daniels is ready to go and Georgia has to make a quarterback switch, that is what could hinder the Bulldogs offensively and overall in this game. So I just see it as a signal caller battle. And while I would give Tennessee the very slight edge, it's really just kind of a situation where both guys are unproven and have to use this game to prove themselves.
That game is at 2:30 on CBS Tulsa time.